Hello, and welcome to another installment of Text Appeal Lessons on the Body, Mind, and Beyond. Today, I will be picking up where I last left off. I hopefully made you have an existential crisis where you questioned reality, and hopefully you returned back to a normal state of just living life, because that's just kind of how it works. I spoke a lot about addiction and even touched on a little bit of determinism for the sake of planting that seed as a future discussion. Now I will dive into some more biology, psychology, and philosophy, mostly just because I love doing that. This episode will connect some ideas in biology and physics, which makes sense when you consider that we are physical beings and chemistry is the study of physical matter, its properties, and behavior. We are chemical entities as much as we are anything else from the scientific point of view. Maybe your mind will be blown. Maybe you are like, duh. Regardless, I hope you learned something new and valuable. So here we go. So I'm going to begin today's discussion talking about homeostasis. You've probably heard this term before. We're going to be using it mostly in a biological sense, but it also relates to physics. When we do not provide our minds and bodies with the proper nutrients, we always deteriorate into a more uncomfortable state of being, and this is really inevitable. In biology, we talk about a term called homeostasis. In biological terms, homeostasis involves regulating various bodily factors such as temperature, blood sugar levels, hydration, and more within a narrow range that is optimal for the body's functioning. For example, your body regulates its temperature through mechanisms like sweating when it's hot and shivering when it's cold, all to maintain a stable internal temperature. This same process is heavily involved in things like hunger, sleep, sexual desire, and just about any state that influences your actions. We now understand that a lot of our behavior is influenced by biological processes. So, as an organism, your behavior is dependent on your intentions, whether your intentions are formed deliberately by the powers of the neocortex or formed by subconscious forces. There is an element of intention regardless. Some people are much more well equipped to formulate and follow through with plans of action surrounding a target. Conscientious people are particularly good at forming long-term goals and following through with them. This speaks to their ability to aim at hypothetically better states of being and then following through with an intentional plan to execute. The term conscientious refers to how much of a conscience somebody possesses. So you can imagine that a person that is very high in this personality trait is going to be very concerned with right and wrong, however they define it. So, we can think of a conscientious person as reliable because they are more likely to follow through with a plan they have formulated. I am really trying to double down on the idea that we human beings are goal-setting creatures. We make all sorts of goals, consciously or subconsciously, but some goals require much more prefrontal cortex action and plenty of time to sit down and formulate the goal itself. These kinds of goals, which can be formulated and pursued with a strategy, are certain types of goals that we can call deliberate goals. For now, however, I want to focus on the quote-unquote goals that are created at the subconscious level. Goals of this type arise in our conscious experience as a result of falling out of the homeostatic state. When hunger starts to suggest that you should stop writing the transcript for your next YouTube video, it is fairly easy to shove it aside and continue working. With enough time transpiring, though, you will soon be overwhelmed with hunger and motivation to go and find some food. Your body understands at a functional level that you must be persuaded to provide it with food, so there are many complex mechanisms set in place to provide this persuasion. Hunger is determined by things such as your glucose levels and your hormone levels, most specifically two hormones called leptin and ghrelin. Leptin and ghrelin play a vital role in the complex interplay of hormones and neural circuits that regulate hunger, energy balance, and body weight. Higher levels of leptin in the bloodstream signal to the brain that levels of fat in the body are adequate and the energy reserve is full. The feeling of being full is related to levels of leptin in the body, and it's even more complicated as leptin binds to receptors in the hypothalamus, which is notably a very archaic brain structure that largely resembles brain structures in ancient animals, implying that this process of regulating essential functions like feeding, reproduction, and responses to environmental cues have been around for millions of years. This logically makes plenty of sense, as the actions an organism has to prioritize in order to survive are going to relate directly to the most essential basic needs of the organism. The body begins to scream at you when anything arises as a major threat to your well-being, and it will quickly provide discomfort in order to motivate you toward food, water, warmth, and other similar needs. Calling back to the previous episode, I talked a little bit about dopamine and its ability to create pleasurable experiences. But after you've actually already created a habit or an addiction, the dopamine spike itself comes before you ever actually partake in the action or the behavior. It actually means that the higher levels of dopamine create more discomfort or motivation so that you will carry out a plan of action to satisfy the addiction. This even extends into psychological processes. Coping with trauma, or even using the word trauma, is super complex, and I am speaking in quite reductive terms. But we must recognize that as an organism, what we do voluntarily and involuntarily is generally in the name of returning to a more comfortable, or more accurate, sustainable state. Even voluntary and temporary moments of discomfort are usually for the sake of later gratification, and exercise is the prime example of this. We choose to engage in exercise for all sorts of benefits. These benefits are directly related to mental and physical health, longevity, social status, or other gains that benefit the individual in some way. We trade comfortability in the present and choose to undergo a struggle so that comfortability comes back around in a more sustainable manner. This process of deciding whether to steal from the present or bet on the future is sort of like a negotiation with a future version of ourselves. So be a good business partner for yourself, and maybe other people will find you respectable, trustworthy, and more opportunities may come your way as a result. I also want to note that if we look at the basic difference between impulsivity and inhibition, this directly relates to all of this System 1 and System 2 talk that I have been going on about the past couple episodes. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of what homeostasis is, I want to talk about a similar concept and term called allostasis. Now, allostasis is actually another major player here, as we actually prepare ourselves for an upcoming event physiologically prior to the event even taking place. Unlike homeostasis, which focuses on maintaining a steady state, allostasis includes the ability to anticipate needs and prepare the body for upcoming demands. For instance, the body might increase heart rate and blood pressure in anticipation of physical activity. I wanted to add this because I think the basic concept of homeostasis is enough to get my point across, but we humans are so complex that our anticipation of something can greatly affect our well-being for better or for worse. Okay, so our biology does a pretty good job of keeping us alive by signaling to us when certain actions need to take place. The way in which I have come to understand myself better as a biological entity is recognizing the reason why I always have to keep putting everything back together when it falls apart. The reason is actually rooted in physics, and that's pretty easy to see when you consider the second law of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is a branch of physics that deals with the principles governing the behavior of heat, energy, and work in systems. The second law of thermodynamics is entropy. Entropy is a measurement of how much disorder is in a system. A really simple example in physics is when you look at water molecules. Water in the form of ice has low levels of entropy, as the water molecules in ice have a much more fixed structure than water in the form of liquid. So ice has lower levels of entropy than liquid, because liquid water has more disorder in its molecular structure. The second law of thermodynamics states that the total entropy of an isolated system always increases over time. In other words, natural processes tend to move toward a state of maximum disorder. This basically means at the level of atoms and molecules, the world is always and inevitably moving toward disorder and is basically falling apart. As a biological entity, your body needs maintenance all the time in order to continue to live because of this same process. Like I have said before, you are a system, which then means that you are always becoming more and more disorganized at the physical level. With age, our bodies deteriorate, and after death, you end up being no more than a skeleton because the parts of you that were fighting this deterioration are no longer active. This is useful to understand because, in a metaphorical sense, we can easily see that without maintenance to our social lives, they can quickly fall apart in a similar manner. If you do not tend to your romantic partner's needs, they may look elsewhere for love. If you do not go and see your buddies, they will surely find new ways to spend their time. And if you don't call your grandparents, they are probably going to say something about it the next time you see them. I'm talking to myself here, and I've learned some hard lessons about how to manage all of the important parts of a life. Sometimes people misinterpret your intentions, and that's okay because they are juggling just as much as you are. How could it be any other way? If you stop practicing your sport or stop playing the piano, well, your ability to perform will take a hit, and this is just the nature of reality in every way imaginable. The world is always slipping into disorder, meaning the world is naturally entropic. But what you and I are, as humans alive today, is a biological entity that has become aware of this predicament, and in turn, you are a neg-entropic force in nature. Neg-entropy is the opposite of entropy, and our constant return toward homeostasis is just part of being alive. I find this to be fascinating, although it was not always this way. There have been multiple instances over the past few years where this idea of the whole world falling apart tormented me, and I felt so tiny in comparison to the cosmos themselves. But for many reasons, I am at a point where I can more easily accept the duty of being that which creates and maintains order in a chaotic world. Mind you, this is a core message of the biblical narrative, as man is supposed to have been made in God's image. Regardless of your religious orientation, there is no doubt that God, or the universe, has a way of creating habitable order from chaos, and the continual maintenance of this planet at the level of ecosystem is built right into Mother Nature's laws. In the next few episodes, I will actually begin to reconcile my respect for ancient wisdom, often in the form of sacred texts like the Bible and other prescriptions for how to live properly, with a more scientific understanding of the world from a modern person's perspective. This reconciliation is really the fuel for my life's work. If you are a lover of science but still have the sense that humans are spiritual creatures, this series is perfect for you. In addition, if you are someone who considers themselves a person of faith, but your curiosity beckons in terms of how the natural world operates, you have found your guy. I love to juggle problems like this, and I will certainly not find the answers to all my questions, but I also recognize how important my continual maintenance of self is, and there is no better way to learn than to live, reflect, and try again. Part of living is learning, and this learning can take place experientially or theoretically. The entire point of education is so that you can become immersed with information, which you can then use to leverage things in your favor in all sorts of ways. But sometimes theory falls short of teaching us the really valuable lessons that an actual experience can provide. Regardless of anyone's opinion on the matter, it is 100% the case that the more information someone has about any given topic, this will positively correlate with this person's understanding of said topic. Oftentimes, people become educated in a certain field, and they quickly realize just how little they understand about that field. This phenomena is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which you may have heard of. Take the famous quote by Socrates, which perfectly illustrates the point. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. The unexamined life is not worth living. There is only one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. Now, Socrates by no means understood everything, but there is a reason his name is so well known approximately 2,500 years after his death. Socrates understood the utility of mindfulness practice, and I aim to help my listeners become more mindful because it is so beneficial to the individual as well as the broader community. Moral of this story: live, learn as much as you can, and as often as possible. Remember what you are in the spirit of mindfulness. I've always wanted to put things together, and I am obsessive over problem solving, sometimes to a detriment, and this is something that I will learn how to manage and hopefully leverage in my favor. Everything is and will always fall apart right in front of you. So my question to you is, when your plans, relationships, and sense of identity fall apart, are you going to pick the pieces back up? Or are you going to be swallowed by the ocean of problems that you're up against? Relate this now back to how we are always trapped in this cycle of formulating a plan for what to do next, chasing that target, achieving it or not, and then rinse and repeat. Have you considered that maybe getting the next task done is a little bit less important than you have always thought? Maybe your ability to achieve goals is not necessarily tied to your right to have a peaceful existence. This may sound contradictory, and like I said, you better do a good job of putting things back together, because waiting around will simply result in more disorder and chaos. Physics said it, not me. But really, consider the reasons why you work so hard toward that promotion or that accolade, and put that next to your overall sense of well-being. Make sure you are providing maintenance to the things that you value most, and don't act so surprised when some people neglect you after you have been so caught up in your own life. There are plenty of mysteries in this world, but why things go wrong is not really one of them. We already understand the physical structure of our reality, and understanding entropy can do a lot for your own worldview. They say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I prefer to think of it more as, when it breaks, I'd better fix it, and if I choose not to, I must live with the consequence. Also, do not be afraid to recognize that sometimes you try to fix things and you fail. Failure is no reason not to try, and I also recognize that there are plenty of problems to fix, so maybe we should all be a little less irritable and unbearable to the people we love, and instead, we should try to be kind and try to appreciate life any chance we get. I next want to talk about something called telic versus atelic actions. We are going to use these concepts, and we are going to apply them to our understanding of emotions in the name of a life well lived. The word teleological comes from the Greek telos, which means end, and logos meaning reason. A teleological action is an action that is carried out in the name of the end goal. Or you can say that the reason for taking a teleological action is to see it through to its end. An example of a teleological goal is when you say, I am going to the gas station to get gas so that I can drive back to my hometown after finishing up my last final exam of the semester. Notice how I set a goal to go and get something, and I am doing it for a purpose, and upon completing this quest, the goal will have been completed. The word telic is directly related to this meaning, and something atelic instead refers to an action that lacks this sense of quote-unquote purpose. Atelic activities are all about the process, an example being going for a walk with no particular destination. The act of walking itself is atelic, and although we can still set a goal to walk somewhere specifically, the atelic portion of this activity is all about the walking itself. Our life is a continuous transition from atelic and telic activities, and the prioritization of one or the other can be very important for the way someone lives their life. We all know people who are hyper goal oriented, and it seems like everything they do is in the name of some achievement, award, or for the completion of tasks themselves. These people are admirable, and their success inspires the rest of us to follow suit. I do also want to point out that some people have big goals and they chase them with a passion while managing to still be pretty solid individuals at the moral level as well. This type of person is awesome, and I am blessed to know many of them. And I also like to think that my personality captures these qualities as well, or at least I aim at having a personality like that, and I slowly work towards it. On the flip side, there are people who will step on anyone and anything to elevate themselves to the next level. They utilize other people instrumentally, and sometimes they even gain great satisfaction in watching others fail while they cling to their own pride and sense of accomplishment. There are reasons why people like this exist, and I will soon discuss psychopathic personalities in another episode, not too far in the future. It is not a mystery why we are all like this to some degree, as there are many reasons to achieve things and to aim for accolades and accomplishment. Once again, your nervous system is built to reward you for maximizing an opportunity, and when a goal is completed, the satisfactory feeling you experience is the body's way of reinforcing the behavior. This is why you are so obsessed with leveling up to the next stage on that video game, or why you might practice at something vigorously for months in preparation for an important competition. This is great and all until you realize that it is an endless cycle of setting a goal, chasing it, succeeding or failing, and then being left with the problem of having to make another goal. This reminds me of the punishment of Sisyphus, as he must continually push the boulder back up the hill, as it will never stop rolling back down. So what do we do with this information? I think that it is of the utmost importance to become aware of this predicament, and to then try your best to come up with a plan for living your life in a way that balances telic and atelic activities. Of course, you should dream big, chase achievements, and even social status, as we all know that higher socioeconomic success comes with many social benefits. But also, do not forget that chasing socioeconomic status in a narrow manner will only leave you as unfulfilled as you were before you leveled up in the first place. I now want to read you a story from the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho that perfectly captures the moral of the story here. Here's the story. A merchant sent his son to learn the secret of happiness from the wisest of men. The young man wandered through the desert for 40 days until he reached a beautiful castle at the top of a mountain. There lived the sage that the young man was looking for. However, instead of finding a holy man, our hero entered a room and saw a great deal of activity. Merchants coming and going, people chatting in the corners, a small orchestra playing sweet melodies, and there was a table laden with the most delectable dishes of that part of the world. The wise man talked to everybody, and the young man had to wait for 2 hours until it was time for his audience. The sage listened attentively to the reason for the boy's visit, but told him that at that moment he did not have the time to explain to him the secret of happiness. He suggested that the young man take a stroll around his palace and come back in 2 hours' time. However, I want to ask you a favor, he added, handing the boy a teaspoon in which he poured 2 drops of oil. While you walk, carry this spoon and don't let the oil spill. The young man began to climb up and down the palace staircases, always keeping his eyes fixed on the spoon. At the end of 2 hours, he returned to the presence of the wise man. "So," asked the sage, "did you see the Persian tapestries hanging in my dining room?" Did you see the garden that the master of gardeners took 10 years to create? Did you notice the beautiful parchments in my library? Embarrassed, the young man confessed that he had seen nothing. His only concern was not to spill the drops of oil that the wise man had entrusted to him. So, go back and see the wonders of my world, said the wise man. You can't trust a man if you don't know his house. Now more at ease, the young man took the spoon and strolled again through the palace, this time paying attention to all the works of art that hung from the ceiling and walls. He saw the gardens, the mountains all around the palace, the delicacy of the flowers, the taste with which each work of art was placed in its niche, and upon returning to the sage, he reported in detail all that he had seen. But where are the 2 drops of oil that I entrusted to you? Asked the sage. Looking down at the spoon, the young man realized that he had spilled the oil. Well, that is the only advice I have to give you, said the sage of sages. The secret of happiness lies in looking at all the wonders of the world and never forgetting the 2 drops of oil in the spoon. I love this story, and it has impacted me in a really profound way. Whenever I catch myself forgetting about the oil on my spoon, I make sure to reevaluate my priorities, and I find myself identifying with the conscientious and disciplined sides of myself more regularly. In the other case, when I forget to take my eyes off the spoon, I realize that I can use a little bit of a chill pill, and this type of peace can be achieved through meditation and an emphasis on more atelic activities. This story recommends that you make sure and pay attention to the beautiful things in life, so find something beautiful and just gaze at it. I write this as I am at a state park in my hometown, in front of a beautiful lake amongst my family. I am with grandparents 4 times my age and little cousins who are 1/4 of it, so I'm going to take my eyes off the spoon for a bit and enjoy some nice moments with the people I love. Thank you for listening to the 4th episode of Text Appeal, Lessons on the Body, Mind, and Beyond.